to LOA Today. I'm Walt Jason.
I've been doing this podcast since September of 2012, and boy, are my lips tired.
This is your daily dose of happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today. And our friend Anne Marie is sadly not feeling well today. She's going to be getting better and healing up and getting ready to join us again next week. So I look forward to talking to her again at that time. But today I'm joined by a man down under in Queensland, Australia. His name is Andrew Matthews. And I can just tell you, folks, from the initial very brief conversation we had before we got started, I can tell this is going to be fun. We're going to have a lot of fun today. So, Andrew, first of all, welcome to the program. And how are you doing?
I'm honored to be with you, Walt. Thank you for having me.
And I just want to point out that I appreciate you joining us from tomorrow, which was very helpful. I mean, I know that's kind of tough on the schedule, but well done.
It's 6 a.m. tomorrow for most of you.
Wow, crazy. And I appreciate that so much that you got up this early to do the show with us. But we need to know a little bit more about you. Certainly my audience doesn't know much about you yet, so we've got to kind of introduce you here. So tell us a little bit about your background, and you're an author, so we want to find out what led you to become an author.
My passion initially was drawing and painting. In fact, I studied classical drawing at the Art Students League of New York as a 19-year-old. And into my 20s, I was painting portraits for a living. I also did a certain amount of cartooning for magazines that you may have heard of. Well, when I was 25, I made a shocking discovery. I discovered that the happiest people I knew had bigger problems than me. And I couldn't, that made no sense, because I wasn't as happy as I should be. But suddenly I realized I had no excuse. And so that began a journey for me, trying to find out how happy people think. I read a couple of hundred books. I went to seminars, and I was painting the portraits of judges and lawyers and successful entrepreneurs, and some of whom weren't so happy, and other people that I would come across, often with major challenges. And this may have been your experience, where you come across someone who's gone broke, or they've recovered from cancer, or they've lost loved ones way too soon, but they still seem to find joy and meaning in life beyond what most people do. All of this led to my first book, Being Happy, in 1988, when there were no books around about being happy. And there were certainly no self-help books with cartoons in them. So my mission...
That's true. I can actually attest to that.
So my mission, Walt, was to create a book that would be more fun to read than a lot of the books I'd been reading. Here's the thing. About 10% of people are comfortable going into bookstores and reading books, but 80% of people read magazines. So the obvious thing is, why don't you make your book feel a bit more like a magazine? Have a little bit of white space.
Oh, heaven forbid, in a book, white space? Oh, no, there's a law against that, isn't there? I'm pretty sure there is.
And have some cartoons which will help us to remember the message. So my aim was to create a book about being a little happier that wasn't just for insurance salesmen, but was for anybody. A student. Yeah, I mean, in the 1980s, who was reading self-help books?
Oh, yeah. All you had to do was walk into any, at that point, a Borders or a Barnes and Noble here in the United States, and that's what you saw. Everything was written for people who were in sales, and there was a very small niche market for people who were trying to lose some weight or fix something going on in their lives. But that was it. That was the small market.
So that was the plan, and so I sent this book off to... This was my second book. My first book was a book for children, which had been rejected by 60 publishers.
Wow.
But Being Happy was rejected by 17 publishers. but publisher number 18 sold 3 million copies.
Wow.
So I learned a little bit about persistence and keep doing whatever you can and do it as well as you can. And so that took me on a journey around the world, and I did tours of the States, and I'd go to Mexico and Korea and Japan, and so now 11 more books later. Um, at some stage in the journey, my wife, who is an extraordinary 4'11" dynamo, nothing stops her, scared of nobody, not even me. She became my publisher, Julie,
Oh, wow.
and she said, Andrew, we're going global, and so thanks to her, my books are now in 48 languages.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, so she's so we
Yeah, just
people
just
say
out of curiosity, I mean, this is really not neither here nor there. How many of those languages does she actually speak?
none.
None.
She's Malaysian Chinese, so she
Oh,
can
wow.
understand some Cantonese.
Oh, okay.
Um, but here's the thing: if you have a book uh, that starts to do well in the English language, then sometimes fortunate things will happen. For example, a
Mm,
German publisher picked up Being Happy in the San Francisco airport,
mm.
contacted us, can I publish it?
Oh, okay.
Mexican publishers uh, saw my books in America in Borders by, I think it was Being Happy. So they published it. And then there is a book fair called the Frankfurt Book Fair,
Mm,
which is held every year, and that's for publishers. Because the Germans invented the printing press,
mhm.
they kind of figure we are the serious people about publishing. And so the the big publisher, the big publishing fair where publishers meet publishers and buy rights is in Frankfurt every October. So
Mhm.
that was also a way for us to get into, Croatia and Denmark and so on.
Okay. Yeah, that's
Mm.
exciting. Wow. I mean, when you first wrote Being Happy, did you honestly think you'd end up in 48 languages?
I was desperate to get into one language. I already had a this. I already actually my first uh, uh, children's book, which is still in my cupboard somewhere. Um, I had this brilliant plan. I thought if rather than write to a publisher and get rejected, write to another publisher, get rejected. I thought if I can get a list of the 60 major publishers in the English-speaking world, send them each a copy, so I make 60 copies,
Mhm.
and then at least 5 are going to like it, and then I'll choose what publisher I want.
It's a
So
good theory.
the rejection started coming back 10, 25, 37, 49, 58, 59, 60, 61. One publisher wrote to me twice and said,
You wrote
forget
you
it.
twice to reject you twice.
So, having made that kind of start in the publishing world, I had no, I had no huge expectations. But I've always operated with this theory, Walt, that you do the best that you can, and you keep on doing the best that you can,
Mm,
and collect a lot of the individual things that you do never work out as well as you hope they will. But
true.
collectively, if you keep putting in a big effort, then something good will happen. And so I just wrote the best book I could. And when it came out, I spent like 3 years full time traveling the world. And here's the thing, nobody had heard of me. So he- here's the dilemma for an author that nobody's heard of. Okay. If you go into a bookstore and you're sitting at a table, a desk with books on it, they don't want to come up and look at the books because they haven't heard of you. So they probably don't think they're going to like it.
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, if they look at it and they don't like it, what do? They're embarrassed. They got to put it back on the table and leave. So here was the solution to the problem. I draw cartoons. I took an easel like this into my
Mm-hmm.
bookstore signings, and I would have a microphone. And I had the desk behind me, and I would just draw cartoons and talk about my philosophies. And I
That's
would talk
brilliant.
about, and people would just come and watch me draw
Sure.
cartoons.
Yeah.
And at some stage, when somebody would ask me to sign a book, then the people who got bored watching me sign a book would pick up my books, and so
Sure.
something would happen. And I did that all over America. I did it all through Southeast Asia, um,
Fantastic.
and, eventually um, we found that we had a book that was global.
Yeah. That's fabulous. I love what you did too. I mean, first of all, you took your skill, which is a terrific skill to have, and you turned it into something that would draw attention. And because everybody, I mean, this is kind of universal. People love watching a guy draw or a woman, either way, but they love watching the art being created. They don't even necessarily need to know what the purpose of it is or what the goal is or what you're trying to accomplish with it. They just love it. Like, oh my goodness, there's somebody drawing. Let's go see what they're drawing. I mean, they
Yes,
don't have to know anything about you're a book. Oh, wait a minute, this guy wrote a book. I mean, this is like an afterthought. The cool part is that you're drawing, and you took advantage of that and said, "Yeah, I'm going to draw for the public." I love that.
you just do whatever you can, and I guess I learned from my dad. My dad was a landscape painter,
Hmm.
and he used to go and he supported our family really well for 25 years as I was growing up painting the Australian landscape.
Wow,
And
good for him.
he would go and sketch his sketch of maybe the Flinders Ranges Mountains or the Murray River or someplace in Australia,
Hmm.
and he would then go and finish his painting where the tourists were. And
Ah, so he
and
understood the
so
same idea.
yeah, so I just kind of went to school on that, and
Yeah,
but it's a nice thing watching somebody creating,
it
and
is.
the curiosity of what's this going to be and so on. So
I think you just framed it very nicely. It's a nice thing watching someone creating. And I think one of the main reasons that's true is we are all creators, but so many of us, we've been trained by culture, society, whatever, to kind of hide our creativity. We don't really want to bring it out into the open. We might get criticized. Somebody might not like it. Somebody might not appreciate that we're doing it or something like that. So we hold it in, and especially it might not be good enough. It might be really lousy. So I'd be embarrassed to show it to somebody. And here's somebody they see an artist really just on display. It's like, okay, I'm doing my stuff. Wow, that guy must be really good in order to feel like he could do that. That's the
yes,
thought process.
and also they start to get a sense of, well, maybe if he's doing that, then I can do a bit more of my thing.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
and that's the important thing.
that's
Um,
fabulous.
so what it also did, and it's the same when people look through my books, they see cartoons and they kind of breathe a sigh of relief, like this looks a bit easier,
Mm,
and because the cartoons relate to the message, uh, so they might, like in my latest book, I've got a cartoon of a guy who is climbing a mountain and he's sweating and he's with his dog and the dog is sweating, and the caption of the cartoon is what you thought was breaking you is probably making you.
nice. Yeah.
And someone sees that and says, yeah, maybe the tough things I'm going through are preparing me for success that I hadn't imagined.
It's a valid point.
Or
And I mean, I look back on my own life and that was something that it took me quite some time to learn. I literally did not believe that, first of all, like you said, the happiest people were the ones who had the most problems. I thought that was insane. And I
yeah,
also didn't believe that I could do anything about any problem that came along other than just do my best to solve it because, I had to, if it was bad news, I had to treat it like it was bad news. If it was going to hurt me, then I had to treat it like it was going to hurt me. If it was something that was going to be harmful, then I had to treat it that way. The idea that I could laugh at it or that I could not take it too seriously. That was just outside of my radar. I had no personal association with that at all. And when I finally learned that that was true, first of all, it was a shock. Second of all, it was eye-opening. It was eye-opening because, wow, that you can really do that. You can choose your responses to things. You don't have to be locked into whatever society says you should be feeling about something or thinking about something or doing about something. That was like a shock. It was a shock wave that hit me.
And what you're touching on, Walt, is the idea that no disasters are total disaster, or most disasters are not total disasters.
Yeah.
So we've all had our plans affected. An airline cancels our flight,
Sure.
and then we meet someone on the next flight that
Yeah.
changes everything.
Yeah.
Or maybe we fell in love with someone that we thought was going to be our forever person, and they dump us, and then we meet them in 20 years time and we think, I
Dodged
dodged a
the
bullet.
bullet. Yes, that was the phrase that came to my mind.
So the essence is that it's not what happens to us, but it's the action that we take that is the most important thing.
Yeah.
And that's what we see again and again. And I mean, as you've expressed, there was a point where you didn't get that, and there's a point when you began to embrace it. And that is what I've sought to do with my books. It is to help people to move from that position of I can't do anything about what happens to me, I'm a victim, to none of this is going to beat me because I know that it's all about how I respond to it. And
Yeah.
it's easier said than done, but ultimately, and it's okay to go and kick the wall for a while, but
Just be aware that you'll
eventually
probably end up with a sore toe when you keep doing it. It just, fair warning.
sure. So we come back and we say, okay, I realize that, this is not what I would have wanted to happen, but here's a theme for some of my books, and what I talk about in Bouncing Back is that whenever things go wrong, we ask ourselves, what is one good thing about this? And that tends to stop that run of negative thoughts. Because negative thoughts are like rats, you get
Oh,
one
yeah.
negative thought and suddenly you're overrun by them.
That's
So
right.
that idea of and that in my experience is essentially what happy people do. They get bumped off a plane, or they get sacked, or they have a relationship that ends when they didn't think it would. And they start to say, well, what is one good thing about being stuck in traffic? Well, I
Mm.
can listen to my favorite podcast. I can plan my weekend. It's better than walking.
Yes. It's better than walking. That's
Even
a good one.
yeah, even being broke, even you say, well, I'm going to have a story to tell my grandchildren. Get me setting some goals. I learn who my friends are.
Oh, yeah. There's a big one. Yeah.
Yeah.
You do learn that when you go through hardship, when you go through trauma or tragedy or whatever, you do find out who really is important to you, who really matters to you, and who was more of a fly by night kind of a friend. That
Yeah.
I don't know where you are, but there's a very strong relationship between two leading famous basketball players in the U.S., Larry Bird and Magic Johnson. They were rivals when they played in the NBA, and to this day, they're not close friends in the sense that they're on the phone with each other or seeing each other all the time. They only need to see each other maybe once a year or something, but they're tight. They are completely tight friends. And the reason is that when Magic Johnson was one of the first heterosexual men to acquire AIDS,
Yes.
Larry Bird was one of the first people who got on the phone to find out if he was okay, which was, according to the way society usually works, that would have been the last person to reach out to him because they were rivals. But it really made
Yes.
an impact on Magic to the point where
Yes.
they, despite the fact that they came from completely different backgrounds, completely different cultures and traditions and so forth, they are as tight as you can possibly be as friends. And
Nice
that's true
story.
friendship. Yeah. and it's a wonderful thing. Something else you mentioned too, you talked about how important it is to take action, especially when things are going wrong. And you're right, it's very important to take action. There is one other piece that I learned along with it, though, because when I went through my trauma, my particular trauma was that I became self-employed at the beginning of the 21st century and ended up having my business wiped out by the 2008 financial crisis. Even though I had nothing to do with mortgages or real estate, my business was kind of like collateral damage. All my clients went,
Yes.
they were all very small nonprofit organizations, so they all disappeared. So my business disappeared. And when I went through that, I kept trying to do things. I kept trying to take steps, but my steps kept leading me to worse and worse and worse. And I didn't understand why. I was doing what I had been taught. You just keep going. You keep doing your innovation. You just keep learning. You do all that stuff, and it wasn't working. And I didn't understand why. Which is one of the reasons I started learning about law of attraction. What I ultimately came to understand years later was that the reason I wasn't getting anywhere is that I continued to find ways to be upset about the fact that the business had fallen apart. I didn't realize that in order to make the change, it wasn't enough to just take action. I had to take action from a position of positivity. I had to take action from a point of view that said things are looking up, not things are looking down. And that seemed that's what I was referring to earlier when I talked about how it was a real eye opener to discover that I wasn't tied in, I wasn't locked in to whatever the traditional societal approaches to understanding a particular situation. In other words, I wasn't locked into being depressed about the fact that my business had failed. I wasn't locked in to having to be frustrated by it or angry by it. I could actually find ways to find joy in it. That's the part that was mind-boggling to me. When I finally did learn to
Yeah.
shift that, first of all, the first time I was able to shift it, I was kind of stunned. But beyond that, that's when things started to turn around. When I combined that with action, that's when the action started to become positive. That's when it started to become productive. Until then, I was working against myself, and I didn't even know it.
Which leads into that whole thing. I love that story, Walt. What leads into the idea that uh, why it is that happy people are more successful
Mm.
because we grow up with the idea that I'm going to, work my brains out, and when I become rich, then I'll spend some time on being happy.
Yes.
And the reverse is true. We decide to be happy first, and then we become a magnet for opportunity.
Yeah.
We see things differently. It's all about, as you say, it's about our emotion and the emotion that we bring to it, and being able to let go of stuff that's not supporting us.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious when you've had so much success there, but you made allusion early on to the failures. You couldn't get the books to be sold. You never did actually get the children's book successfully sold. Um,
Yeah.
there are a lot of people, probably including myself back then, who would have given up on that. And you talked about how you just felt it was so important to just keep going, keep going, keep going. That persistence is a theme that shows up a lot in these interviews and the various people I've met over the years doing this podcast. And it's one that I've really come to appreciate. But I guess part of the question that I want to ask you is kind of the same question I've asked others, which is, why were you so persistent? I mean, you could have given up. What kept you going?
I believed that I had something that was uh, going to be special. I
Hmm.
believed, particularly with being happy. I'd read so many books that I felt had good information that were boring,
Mm-hmm.
um, and I felt that there was a serious need out there. Again, we're talking about late 1980s. And I'd made some discoveries that had an enormous impact on me, that related to things like it's not failure that crushes you, but what hurts most is never having tried. I
Mm-hmm.
started to learn some things about gratitude, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Gratitude is so important because you can't be grateful and miserable at the same time.
It's pretty hard.
That's why, it's very simple. I'd learned that if you just stop complaining.
Yeah,
We all know that we tend to talk about what we think about. You think about food, at some stage, you're going to talk about food.
this is
The
true.
reverse is true. We think about what we talk about.
Mm,
So if you're always complaining about having lost your job, or you're complaining about the weather, then it keeps on cropping up in your thoughts and you're more miserable. So we can stop complaining. So there were all of these things that I felt combined into and the other thing, I'd started to understand a little bit about how the mind works, and
mm,
how we attract things that are consistent with
right.
our thoughts and our feelings.
Hmm.
I thought, and there was another thing too that I thought was really important. That is that no one had ever told me, and that is, you have to focus on what you want. When people say, I mustn't forget it, they forget it. When people say, I
Yeah.
mustn't drop this baseball, they drop it. When
Hmm.
you say, I'm going to do this podcast and I mustn't screw it up, you screw it up.
Hmm.
So there's a big part of what we're never taught in school, which is you have to focus on what you want. Your mind cannot work on the reverse of an idea.
That's right. Yeah,
So
that's critical.
those,
I agree with you. That's critically important, and I agree that it needs to be taught more.
it's huge.
Yeah.
So those were some of the ideas that I was really excited about getting to average people. I thought if it took me a while to learn these things, it may be that there's a lot of other people that would find this information valuable. So I thought, just as long as it takes, whatever it takes, I'm going to get this book, Being Happy, out there.
Wow. Good for you. And you said you've done what, a dozen books, something like that?
Yeah, done it, yes, yeah. But this sounds a lot, but that's over like 30 years.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I
So
mean,
I have people say, "How do you write a book?" I write 1 page a day. When I'm writing a book, and, sometimes it's not even that, but I make it a regular thing, and,
yeah.
but I'm a real, believer in the idea of whatever it is that's big that you wanna do, break it up into little chunks and just
Hmm.
do that little bit.
I love that. Yeah, I have a good friend named Andrew Kaplan who wrote a book called The Last Law of Attraction, book you'll ever need to read, which is a rather audacious title, by the way. But he ended up selling 100,000 copies of it. And I asked him one time, "How did you sell 100,000 copies?" And he said, "Well, I answered every email every day. I checked my social media every day. I posted something in support of my book every day. I took some kind of action in support of my book every day." It's the same thing. Whether you're
Yes,
writing it or marketing it, it's the exact same thing.
yes.
I love that. I think it's so important. And by the way, you must really love the writing and the drawing to do that every day.
I do. The drawing, I've literally been drawing for, 50 years.
Mm,
And I've been practicing drawing almost every day for 50 years. So
mm.
this little guy behind me, hang on, I'm getting confused.
I know,
That
it's
one,
always the camera kind of throws you off,
yeah,
right?
this little guy behind me. I knew what I wanted for the cover of Being Happy, and it's really hard to make somebody look like they're jumping and moving
Mm,
in a cartoon, because
yeah.
if you don't get the legs enough, I drew that little guy 200 times.
Wow. No kidding.
I knew the feeling that I wanted, and I just couldn't get it, but I knew I had to have it on the cover of the book. Now the other fellow on this side,
Mhm.
that's he's on the cover of, that's sort of like an evolved kind of jumping little guy. Um, so,
And
that's like a more sophisticated cartoon, not better or worse, just a different style, I guess.
and
Um,
that's the cover of your latest book, right? That's
yeah,
the
bouncing
Bouncing Back
back,
one.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, I wanted to create a, we're all bouncing back from something.
Mm,
We're either bouncing back from eating too much, or we're bouncing back from having lost our job, or we're bouncing back from a relationship that we thought was going to turn out better. And, I noticed that resilient people, and the book is really about resilience.
mm.
Resilient people do certain things. And so I wanted to nail those 7 things and
Mm.
say, you don't have to do all of them. You don't have to do them in any particular order. If you either even do one of them, then that's going to help.
Okay. Can you give us any clues?
Absolutely. So the first one is finding purpose in whatever happens to us. That we
Mm,
say, I might not have chosen this, but I see some purpose in it. I'm going to find purpose, or I'm going to treat it as if there's some purpose in it. The second thing is acceptance. Acceptance is power. When something lousy happens, and people think, if I don't accept it, then I won't be stuck with it. No,
mm,
the reverse is true. You accept it, and then
yeah.
you can move on. Um, Look for good things every day. In general, what do I like about this? Our happiness and our resilience is a lot about the questions that we ask ourselves.
Mm,
Um, uh, I guess when we fall down, get back up. There's a chapter on just people who have done that,
mhm,
and what else are you going to do? You're going to lie there? Why it is that setting goals, we don't have to, be audacious and tell everyone this is what I'm going to do, but setting ourselves even little goals, we feel better even before we've started achieving them because we're, in a sense, taking control of our life. So that's important. And it's very important that we imagine a better life. You can do all the rest, but if you don't see your life as getting better,
mm.
then nothing gets better. So,
Which is the biggest challenge I find. I don't know what about you, but for myself, just trusting that I can imagine what that better life looks like. That's always been the biggest challenge because in the moment that I'm trying to imagine that, that's not what I'm feeling. I'm feeling what I'm experiencing right now. Wait a minute. I can't stay there. I have to go where I want to go instead. No, 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 no. That's not the way my mind works.
yes. Well, I've also got a thought, Walt, that if we're not sure about exactly what we should be picturing, then if we can at least continue to see ourselves as being joyous and blessed,
Mm,
then the universe will probably just join the dots for us. Very, very often, uh, we don't know exactly what we should be doing, but if we can do the very best at what is under our nose, I think that's enough too.
mm.
When goal setting becomes just one of those questions, what do I set and what is right for me now? I've tried a few things. Then we bring it back to saying, what is right under my nose that I need to do? And if I can do that to the best of my ability, that leads to something else and something else and something else. And then we start to, at some stage, we see a better future in front of us, or maybe a better immediate future.
I like the way Mike Dooley describes that. Mike is one of the presenters in the movie The Secret, and he's also an author. Has written some really fabulous stuff. But the way he describes this is, I think, is quite brilliant. He says he tells a story about how before he himself became successful, he he was an accountant and he didn't like being an accountant at all. He was a good accountant, but he just didn't want to be doing that. And he was being presented with doing an accounting role. He'd been given an offer to do a job that he really didn't want to do. That was actually at less pay than what he'd been getting before. Um, it really wasn't the direction he wanted to go, but it was the best of a bunch of bad offers, best of a bad bunch of bad situations. There was like, I think the way he said it was, there was the crappy option, there was the really crappy option, and then there was the incredibly crappy option. And he said, what you have to do is when you're faced with that and you don't have any good options, you have to pick one and just do it. Because if you're willing to do that much, then other options come along that are better options. But if you don't pick something at that point, you just stay there with the crappy option, the crappier option, and the crappiest option.
Yeah, I believe that. And the other thing is, if you've got a crappy option, and it maybe, for example, let's say you're in a job that you don't like, then the way that you enjoy a job you don't like is by giving your best. You don't
Mm,
give your best to please your boss. You give your best because that's the way that you're happiest.
yes.
And at some stage, you will maybe learn enough in that crappy job that you can move to a job that you like more, or someone will see you putting in a wonderful effort in a job that looks crappy and say, "Come and work for me," or you'll get the confidence that you need to go and do your own thing. But as you say, it all started by putting in your best effort into a job that was crappy.
And not just that, but also trusting that when you do put in that effort, that desire, that trust that if you'll just do your best job, something good will come out of it, even though it's a crappy job, a crappy offer. That alone makes a shift in the space-time continuum. I don't know another way to describe it.
Yeah, well, and you stop feeling like a victim, and so,
Yes.
as soon as you stop feeling like a victim, then you're starting to pull other opportunities to you, and your emotional state is
Yeah.
changing everything, yeah.
And
But
then what it really comes down to what I discovered for myself, and now this is going to be my experience, it's not necessarily everybody's experience, although I kind of suspect a lot of people experience it, is that just because I started doing the crappy job rather than the crappier job or the crappiest job, just because I started doing stuff that I didn't enjoy, didn't mean that it all got better right away. And the reason it didn't get better right away is I hadn't actually shifted myself yet. You have to shift yourself too. It's
yeah,
not enough to just go do the job,
yeah, it's
or
it's
even
like
to
if
do it to the best of your ability. You have to you have to change yourself. You have to actually make a change.
yeah, it can't be a pretend, "Well, I'll pretend that I'm happy here."
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Isn't it a bit like, someone's just come to the end of a relationship and they have a friend that says, "Well, you have to let go." And they say, "Well, if I let go, do you think they'll come back?"
Yeah. Well played.
That's
Yes, exactly.
that's not, the kind of commitment to letting go that's gonna be enough. Yeah.
I
So,
remember the
yeah.
first time also that I heard the phrase "let go." Yeah, I was supposed to let go, and my first reaction was, "Let go of what? What am I supposed to I don't even know what I'm holding on to. I'm supposed to let
Yeah.
go, and I don't even know what it is I'm holding on to."
But that whole thing of, unattachment is a wonderful,
Mm,
thing to start to explore.
yeah.
Um, and I talk about that in, I wrote a book called Follow Your Heart, which was about, uh, enjoying your career and doing what you love, and, explore the idea of attachment, how most of us would recognize that we've at some stage tried to sell a car or something and been
Mm,
desperate to sell it and nobody was interested.
yeah.
And then maybe we got some money from somewhere else. We didn't need to sell the car, and then we're getting 3 phone calls a day, people wanting to buy the
Yes,
cars.
yes.
And whenever we're desperate, it's like the universe says, "This is not a healthy way to be. So you're gonna need to learn not to be desperate, and when you learnt the lesson, then what you want will happen."
Yeah, the way I like to express it is the universe is saying, "Okay, I hear you loud and clear. You're miserable and you wanna stay miserable, so okay, I'll give you more opportunities to be miserable."
Yeah, yeah.
Which kind of
Well,
falls into the category of be careful what you wish for.
yeah, I tell the story of, I do a lot of, corporate presentations,
Mm.
and one little story that always tickles people's fancy is the guy who came up to me and said, "You write these books on happiness." He said, "What if I don't wanna be happy?" He said, "What if I want to be miserable?" I said, "Well, then you should be miserable if that makes you happy." And but so much is simply, of life getting better is a decision. Here, this is what led to my first book and then the next 11. On the 19th of October, 1983, I looked at my life and did kind of a quick sort of assessment, relationships fail, cash flow fail, excitement fail, everything was fail. And and I said, I need a different strategy. And from now on, I'm going to be as happy as I can be, and I will embrace any opportunities. If someone invites me somewhere, I will go there. And my mission is to be as happy as I can, because what I've been doing and how I've been seeing the world hasn't been working very well.
Mm.
And my life changed on that day. And
Wow.
everything didn't change immediately. But
Sure.
having made that decision, I'm going to be happier than I was until now, whatever it takes. And there's got to be a certain element of being on your knees and saying, I can't take this anymore.
Yeah.
That sort of gives a, but that was the beginning. But as you say, it all doesn't change, but enough changed on that day
Mm.
that I could see that I was creating a lot of my life experience.
That's the most valuable thing that ever happens is when you get that mirror effectively reflecting back to you what you've been putting out there. Because quite honestly, we don't really recognize it when we're doing it. We don't recognize the stuff that we're putting out there. It takes having that mirror pointing back at us before we finally see it.
Yeah,
I mean, that congratulations, that was a breakthrough day for you.
it was it was an understanding that so much of our life experience and the happiness that we experience stems from a decision that I want to see the good here.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah. I'm curious about something else too, because since you started doing this stuff as an artist who draws, which I think is a fabulous place to start. I'm one of those many people who said, "Well, I can't draw. I'm always really bad at it," and so forth. And I've had many co-hosts here on the show I've been doing the show for 13. Let's see, what year is this? 12 years. Yeah, I just had the 12th anniversary 4 days ago. Um, the the co-host I'm thinking in particular was with me for about a 4 or 5 year period. Her name was Cindy Chavez, and at one point I was asking her because she's also an artist. I said, what does it take to learn how to draw? Because I was never able to do it. And she said it's very simple. You go get a pad of paper, 365 pages in the paper, and you draw something every day. If you do it every single day without fail, 365 days later, you're going to learn how to draw. And when she first said that, I said, "Well, duh, of course, that makes sense." And then the second thought that occurred to me was, "And none of us do it, except for a few people like you."
But yeah, but it's a little bit, it's the same reason that I don't play the piano, and
Yeah.
I had one in my house. So my mother played the piano. But so you've got to get a little bit of a momentum, or a
Mm,
sense that this is going somewhere, and how the next one might turn out. A lot of, if we're talking about the actual business of drawing, a lot of it is about how we see.
mm,
And this is not in any heavy sort of sense of how we see, but a lot of it is in terms of understanding. I'll give you an example. When anybody draws a portrait, everyone knows that the nose is the longest thing on the face.
mhm.
So what most people will do is, if they've got their 3-year-old child and they say, I'm going to draw a portrait of my child, and they know the nose is the longest thing. So although the nose is, okay, the nose is actually that long, they'll draw it that long.
Mhm.
And the 3-year-old looks like they're about 75.
That's
And,
right.
and it's because we don't draw what we see, we draw what we know.
Mm,
And so it's a matter of um, saying, okay, let me stop with all this preconception of what I think I'm seeing. What am I seeing? And it's a matter of training that as much as anything.
and yet there's also the creative side of it because I look at the illustrations that are behind you on the wall, in the background there, and I think it's fair to say that in both cases, none of the features are true to form for what an actual human face looks like, but they're perfect for the characters that you've created. So as any good artist does, you take the basic medium and then you reshape it to what it is that you're trying to do with it.
Yes, yes. So you're always taking what you need, and um, and I'll give you an example that people who Draw will appreciate this.
Okay.
When I was, there was a very famous drawing teacher called Robert Beverly Hale that I studied with at the Art Students League of New York,
Oh,
and
okay.
he was a beautiful man, and he would try to explain to his students that you don't always draw exactly what you see. And we were doing life drawing, and there
Mm.
was a lovely nude model
Mhm.
that we were drawing,
Sure.
and he would go around and look at everybody's sketch and make comments. And there was this big black mass on the abdomen of this model, and he was confused as to why. And then he looked up, and there was a cat on the skylight.
Oh. Casting a shadow.
Yeah, and so that's probably the best illustration of the artist has to decide what is appropriate and what is
Yeah.
relative. And if you want to say, "Well, I just do what I see," maybe not always.
Not always, no. Yeah, I hear you on that. By the way, I also, very much appreciate the fact that you do have that piano in the house because I do play the piano, and that
Oh,
is the one thing
wonderful.
I have learned how to do, so
Okay.
I'm glad that you have the piano, and I'm glad it somehow it makes me feel warmer toward you than I already had, which was pretty warm anyway, because you're an artist, you're excellent at drawing, you can convey all kinds of emotions and so forth with your drawings, I can see that. Uh, it's nice to know that even though you haven't developed that same skill with the keyboard, I have developed with the keyboard, I haven't developed it with the pen and paper, so we're doing it in different ways.
Yes.
That actually brings me closer to somebody, knowing that we all have different ways of being creative, and it's just about appreciating each other's ways of being creative.
I think so, Walt, and I think it's understanding that, very often we just need a little bit of help or encouragement, and I had that,
Mm,
you know, um, even when, I mean, I'd been drawing for many years. When I decided, and I told my father, "I'm not going to law school anymore. I'm going to become an artist."
mm.
He said, "Great."
That's fabulous. What a great
He was
response.
he was an artist, and he'd done all kinds of things,
Mhm.
and his perception of career was that you do whatever you love to do, and you do it to your best. He was a worker.
I
He
wish I
he
had learned that early on. I honestly didn't believe that you could do what you love to do and get paid for it, so that's why I gave up on that idea, but he clearly didn't give up on that idea, and you didn't either. I love that.
Well, but I was blessed because I had a father who did what he loved.
Mm.
So my story is I've never had a job. I've never ever gotten a single paycheck from
Wow.
because I just um, understood and it wasn't because I was particularly amazing. It was just I had a father who did a little bit of real estate development. He was a farmer
Mhm.
for fun. He did
Mm.
farming for
For
fun,
fun,
and he
interesting,
made his
okay,
principal income by painting landscapes of
okay.
the and he was just in this wonderful, joyous storytelling man.
He was ahead of his
Um,
time if he was farming for fun. I mean, today, that's becoming more of a thing. People, going buying a piece of land so they can go back to the land and do farming after they've done some sort of corporate work. He was way ahead of the curve on that one.
well, when I say, yeah, it wasn't like a hobby farm. He had
Yeah.
hundreds of acres that he would and he even had machinery that he would
Wow.
hire out a man on the machinery to do the work on other people's farms.
No kidding.
Because he just loved, farming, and he loved the involvement with the farmers, and he was a guy that could relate to fishermen and farmers,
Mhm.
and then the people who bought his paintings, but yes, I just had the good fortune to see that it was possible to make a living doing what you loved, but
Mhm.
sometimes you go through tough times.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, tough times are gonna happen to everybody. I think probably the biggest challenge for me, and I imagine probably for many people, is believing that if you don't have that kind of an influence, because you had this wonderful influence in your father who already had experience as an artist successfully, and so he was willing to help you, uh, develop and thrive in that way. But if you don't have that kind of backing, if you don't have that kind of background experience, it's kind of like reminds me of something again. My friend Cindy told me one time. I was trying to delve into why is it that some people who go into business for themselves succeed fairly quickly. You know, maybe one or two tries and they get there, and other people can take years and years and not get anywhere. There are various shades of that in between. I mean, it's a whole range of possible outcomes. But why is it that there is a certain subset that always seems to do well? And what we discovered in the course of the conversation is that that subset has some kind of a background, usually a family background of success in business. Like in her own
Yes,
family, she was
yes,
very successful as an entrepreneur. She's a life
yes,
coach and now
yes,
semi-retired, and her family used to run a general store. So she had direct retail experience. And not only did she have direct retail experience, she had successful retail experience. And what we came to realize is that the people who have the quickest response, the quickest experience with success, are the ones who already experienced it in their background. The ones who get there slowest are the ones who don't have to, and they're basically trying to create it for the first time in their familial experience.
and it must be so much harder for those people, Walt,
Well, I'm one
and
of them.
I'm in.
I'm one of them.
Yeah, yeah,
My parents, my grandparents, my grandfather was a slumlord. My father was probably my father and my uncle were probably the most successful. They had corporate careers, but they didn't have business careers. My uncle, one uncle had he actually wanted to try to do something as a positivity kind of a guy, but he died young. The other uncle, this is on my mother's side, he was basically a small time con artist. He would just kind of con people out of stuff all the time. So there was no real steady, successful business background. It was all failures and even slimy tactics kind of the stuff. That was my background to work with, and that is hard because
yes,
you don't have anything. You're literally trying to invent the wheel from scratch.
yes,
That's really
yes.
hard to do.
And I think, coming from that background, you seem maybe think there's special people who have almost divine permission to go out and be successful, but I'm not one of them, it's like.
To an extent, yeah. I don't think I necessarily quite thought of it in those terms, but what I did think was that there were people who had access to stuff I would never have access to,
Mm.
which is a very limiting thought, by the way. Yeah, so that's definitely valuable, definitely worth appreciating that you had that level of support. I think it's wonderful. I'd like to see more and more of it.
I was truly blessed, and the other side to it, where I was also blessed, was I had a mother that was always correcting my grammar.
Oh, helpful for a writer, no doubt about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. What did she end up actually helping you with your first book? I'm kind of curious.
She actually, my mum got to read my first book, and uh, she died years ago. So
Hmm.
my book was published just before she died, and she
Oh
left
my,
this. She before it became an international bestseller.
right.
She read it, and she left this message on my answering service, which I still have on a little tape,
No
where
kidding.
she said, "I'm so proud, and I think it's going to be a bestseller."
Wow.
So that's special, yeah.
What a
But
legacy. Yeah,
yeah,
that is beautiful. I have to tell you, Andrew, I usually enjoy these conversations. I love meeting different people. I love having the conversations with people with a wide variety of perspectives and life experiences and so forth. I've learned a whole lot just by doing that, and I've certainly loved doing that with you. Um, but as usual, we're kind of reaching the point where the hour's almost up. That's what often happens. The more fun we have, the quicker we get there. But there are a couple things I want to do before we lose touch entirely. First and foremost, the book that's most lately out, Bouncing Back. I presume
mm.
it's available in all the usual places.
It's available in, it's not released in America yet. We've
Okay.
just released it in India and, Vietnam and, Singapore, Malaysia, the Philippines, but
Okay.
it's coming out in Australia in January, but it
Oh,
is available on Amazon in ebook and as a hard copy and as an Audible read by me. So wherever you are in the world, you can get Bouncing Back on Amazon. Yes, and it's just about how resilient people think and operate, and how we can be like them. And I think there's 92 cartoons in it.
Wow. You went drawing crazy. I love it.
Yeah,
That's really good. I love also we talked
and
about this before we got started, I love the fact that you narrated your own book. I think we both agree that's important. But it's also important to actually be fairly good at it, and I can tell you'd be very good at it. So, I'm glad that you narrated the book.
it yes, well, I agree that it's sometimes disappointing to buy a book, an audiobook, and find that the person is not really into it, or not delivering the
Mm,
kind of audio message that you would hope for. So it was a joy to go back and read this book that I'd just written,
mhm.
and people are telling me that they're enjoying the audio version. Yeah.
I'm curious, since it's an audio version and since you have 92 cartoons in there, what do you do when you get to a cartoon? Do you describe the cartoon?
I will say something like, on page 92 of this book, there's a guy climbing a mountain and he's sweating, and there is a dog next to him that is sweating. And the caption of the cartoon reads, "What you thought was breaking you is probably making you." Or
Mm,
it may be a cartoon on this page. There is a cartoon of a guy who's eating a little piece of cake, and the caption is, "Happy people concentrate on what they have." And
mm,
then the other part of the cartoon is a guy with a cake with only one little bit missing, and the caption is, "Unhappy people focus on what's missing," and he's looking very miserable. So I kind of, where
like it.
it's appropriate, I will describe the cartoon.
Yeah, very good. I love that. Do you like having readers reach out to you? Do you like hearing from readers?
I love it. And, the joy for me is that every day, even now, I get emails from readers that say, I got an email yesterday from a reader who said she was from Iran,
Mm,
and she moved to Sydney, Australia at
wow,
25,
wow.
and she came across my book, Follow Your Heart.
Mhm.
And even though she was broke and didn't know where she was going, she embraced the ideas in Follow Your Heart, and now she has a PhD in engineering, and
Wow,
she is working for Sydney Rail,
my
and
goodness.
she has just begun posting her own little videos on LinkedIn. And
Excellent.
she said, so um, I know when people say your book changed my life, I know that they changed their life. But the beauty is that sometimes one idea, just one little
Yeah.
idea, will change our entire trajectory. So the challenge of writing a book is to get the idea or the cartoon or the combination of both that somebody's going to see and say, I like that. That's mine. I'm going to take that on board.
How can somebody find out more about you?
I have a website, andrewmatthews.com. So it's, as you can see there, spelled Andrew Matthews, all one word.com. I have a newsletter that please join my newsletter. It's a cartoon and just a couple of words every 2 weeks.
Nice.
I have lots of videos on YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and occasionally LinkedIn.
Beautiful. And we'll make sure that we'll include a link to the main website in the show notes so that people can find that very easily. So, yeah, that's good
Thank you,
stuff.
Rob.
One last thing that I want to do, and you actually touched on it a moment ago, but this is something I've done for a few years now because I realized a few years ago that because we now live in the 21st century where we're internet driven, we're meeting people. I mean, that's one of the things I love about doing this podcast. I've met so many hundreds of so many interesting people who live all over the world, and it's fabulous. But because we're all online, we're also sharing our passions. We're posting stuff, we're giving away free content, we're getting onto podcasts, we're doing all this kind of stuff. And the thing that I recognized and noticed was we weren't getting a lot of credit for the free stuff we're putting out there. We get credit, we'll get paid for a book, or we'll get, somebody will pay for our course, or they'll hire us as a coach or something along that line. But we don't get credit for all that free information we're putting out there that is helping people. And I thought to myself, I can do something about that because I host a podcast. So, Andrew, on behalf of those people you've never met, never seen, never will meet, never will see, who have been consuming your content, hearing you on podcasts, reading stuff that you post on LinkedIn or Facebook or whatever else, and getting benefit from it, and maybe turning into something like what you experienced with that email from the Iranian woman. On behalf of the people you haven't heard from, who have been helped in some ways, thank you. Thank you for what you're doing, because you're making a difference in this world.
Thank you so much, Walt. That means a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's really important. We forget.
And and I must thank you, because it's just been such a delight to firstly meet you just an hour ago and spend this last hour chatting with you and having made a new friend in America. I'm
Yeah.
just delighted. Thank you.
Yeah, I loved it too. And, I kind of miss. I kind of wish that we had missed each other, because I live about 3 hours from New York City. You said you went to school in New York City way back when. We could have crossed paths and we didn't even know it. But thank you very much, Andrew. So much appreciation and so much luck to you with the book. And well, heck, 3 million copies on the first one. I don't think I have to wish you luck. I think I'm just going to say good success. It's coming your way. I'm sure it is. So yeah, all the
And
best.
to you too, Walt. Thank you so much. Thank
And
you.
thank you to our podcast listeners everywhere. We'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.